G'day. I wanted to talk to you today about preparing for the legal studies exam. I wanted to start by making a couple of points. First of all, there is a word limit, and for this exam, I want us just to be a little bit aware of it. Year 11's at 700 words, Year 12's around 900. That's actually even a little bit more than what the syllabus allows. The reason I want you to think about this word limit is because I want you to take some time to plan your answer and to answer with the criteria in the back of your mind. And I'm going to talk about those three criteria later on. So the question is, how are we going to plan for this assignment? How do you start, for this exam? How do you start your preparation? My suggestion would be that you go to Sector, and in week 7 of term 2, there are some useful resources. The first of these is a practice exam question. So the question is, the law changes over time. No simple definition of what a family is, and our laws are based on the traditional view of the family. So what are the situations that have to be reviewed and thought about? So using your knowledge and research that you've done up to now, analyse the extent to which Australia's marriage laws are keeping pace with the changing nature of the family. In particular, discuss how the law defines marriage, what this means for same-sex couples. We've talked an enormous amount about this part of the definition of marriage. Analyse legal issues and problems from the current laws. Evaluate the extent to which the law is keeping pace with the changing needs of society, and justify changes to the law. So the question won't be exactly the same as this, but it's going to be along those same lines. And it will be an essay response, so don't fall into bullet points and headings. So where would you go from there? I've given you a sample answer here. I think that's a pretty good place to start and think about what content you might use in trying to get an answer together. So there I've put in some of the knowledge I'd want to put in there. And I don't think the knowledge has to be that big a section, because right throughout your essay, you're going to be showing me that you have legal knowledge, that you can use legal terms correctly, that you refer to legislation, that you refer to cases. So I went back to the Hyde versus Hyde case and the Australian legislation around marriage. The 4 key elements of that: man and woman for life, to the exclusion of all others voluntarily entered into. I would then add something about the case of Kevin, the fact that the courts are adjusting to what's happened. And look, I'll talk a little bit about the Marriage Act 1961. So after I've gone through that first part, the knowledge, I come to the analysing the element, right? The second criteria. So what do we get out of this? I would start by talking about the current definition of marriage excluding same-sex couples. Maybe think about, are there some human rights around same-sex marriage? Civil unions are available in some states, but there are limitations there. I'd talk maybe about the community response, because remember, we want to bring stakeholders into this, a number of different perspectives. The church is another stakeholder. So these are some of the issues that we look around that become important in analysing a situation. So once we've analysed it, then what should we do about it? And here I've referred to the Irish referendum that gave everyone an opportunity to participate in the decision. Talked about some of the process of changing the constitution through a referendum, if that was going to be the process here. Looked at the area of some other issues. So saying, okay, if we were to legislate same-sex marriage, it would have an effect on, who has access to reproductive technologies, for example, like IVF, who has access to adoption, surrogacy. And so those become important as well. Right? And then I've actually finished with a bigger recommendation too, and saying, well, if the law hasn't kept up with social changes here, family law, and if family law is something that's always going to be evolving, is there a process we can put in place so that the law keeps up with social expectations? Just remember, you don't have to argue one way or another. This is the way I've chosen to put together a basic example. In terms of that, I've also put together the sort of content that I think will be quite useful for you. So as you look through this, here are some of the points that might be relevant to this. Right? The changes that have happened, right? And the fact there's not a simple definition. The Marriage Act, 1961, Section 5, setting out the elements and that came from that Hyde versus Hyde case that we referred to. And then the amendment in 2004. You talk about the history of some of the efforts to change same-sex marriage, so 2009. Here, as I did in the answer, the case of Kevin, that shows that marriage laws may have been keeping pace with changing nature. There has been same-sex marriage across different countries in the world, so that might be something that says that this is a social move. Of course, Ireland has just had the referendum, and a country, a very conservative Catholic country, voted in favour of it. And so then some other points that you can look through there and say, you know, is this about equality? Is there an element of discrimination that comes into it? And then some of the elements around the church and recommendations that you can make. So there's a bunch of things, if you're familiar with there, that will help you cope and answer with any questions. All these things, remember, are on sector. The last thing I want to take you to is to the criteria, which I've popped onto sector, and I'm hoping I can scroll down and show it to you here. All right. Hoping not too many of you are thinking of D's and E's. So what have we got for knowledge? What have we got to do? Definition and description of facts using legal terminology. Right, discriminating use of legal terminology. Explanation of a comprehensive range of legal concepts and processes. So some of the concepts and processes that I touched on in my answer might include things like the process for changing the constitution, the legal concept of marriage, well-chosen language to suit the audience. And I would be careful there. I also think when I go back and emphasise again that there is a word limit that you should be looking at, not writing too much allows you to be coherent and effective in your communication. Okay, investigating. What do we have to do to investigate the legal issue? We have to organise legal information from relevant and valid sources. So what are the important pieces of information that we're going to use? We have to look through the situation and examine legal issues and stakeholders' perspectives. Be careful too with an issue around marriage that we are thinking about legal issues and legal processes. And discerning application of legal concepts to determine logical legal outcomes. Right, what should be the outcomes? Now, responding to the law is all about evaluating it and saying, what are the recommendations about legal outcomes and their implications? So when you make a recommendation, just don't make a recommendation. Justify it, so give some reasons why, and then talk about what might happen out of this. What are some other things? So an example of this for mine was saying, okay, we could have a referendum so to legislate same-sex marriage. Why is this important? Justification of it, well, it's a very important issue. It would then be embedded in the Constitution and everyone in Australia would have a say on the matter. Okay, that's the justification. But then also, what are the flow-ons? What are the suitabilities? What are the implications of this? So then you might talk about the need to think about how issues like surrogacy and adoption are handled. So I hope that gives you guys some ideas. I want to go back to where I started, just these 3 points. Keep an eye on this word limit. Take the time to plan your answer. And keep the criteria in the back of your mind. What are the 3 things you're doing? And the one thing I did wrong with or that you won't do with yours, is I just wanted to set up the criteria. You won't have subheadings because it will be an essay that you will be writing.